why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and like I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were.
All right, strap in, because we're about to unpack one of the most absurd political blame games in recent memory. And believe me, the competition is stacked. This one's all about the media meltdown over Kamala Harris's loss to Donald Trump, and more specifically, the flood of excuses gushing out of MSNBC like an open tap. You'd think by now they'd retired the tired old sexism and racism cards for something new. But nope, same script, same lines, just recycled for the occasion. And here's the kicker. Bill Maher wasn't buying a single second of it. He came swinging with a sledgehammer. And honestly, I'm here for it. So let's roll it back for a second.
But you're either the person who's Googling the day before, did Biden drop out, or in a week. Did anyone in this audience not know enough about Kamala Harris pretty much after a week to make a decision?
All week long, pundits have been parroting the line that Harris's campaign was flawless. Flawless. Please. That's like calling New Coke a marketing triumph or pretending Cats was peak cinema instead of 2 hours of digital nightmare fuel. This campaign wasn't flawless, it wasn't even in the same zip code. And once that narrative started crumbling, out came the emergency excuses. Sexism, racism, voter ignorance. But here's the reality. America's more than capable of electing a woman president. The problem? The party keeps serving up the wrong women over and over again.
Sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things. And I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put.
That's not misogyny. That's just people not being impressed. And guess what? That's allowed. Now here's where it really gets spicy. Bill Maher points out that Kamala spent 3.5 years stuffed in a political broom closet. She was so invisible her approval rating probably ticked up just because people forgot she existed. Then suddenly, bam, with only 107 days left on the clock, she's thrust out as the face of the Democratic ticket. And the pundits? They actually tried to spin it like America just didn't have enough time to get to know her.
The Vice President of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days
is not long enough to know somebody.
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what they.
No.
You have someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. This isn't the 1800s. We live in a world where Donald Trump has managed to dominate the national conversation for 8 straight years, half the time without even trying. You think Americans need a decade to form an opinion on someone? They didn't need it for Trump. They didn't need it for Obama. And they sure didn't need it for Kamala. Here's the part MSNBC and their media pals choke on. People already knew her. They just didn't like her. Period. Now let's get into the media silos Bill Maher flagged, because this is where it gets really damning. He's right. The right has its own bubbles now. But the whole concept didn't start on the right. It was born when the left locked down legacy outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and NPR and turned them into political armor. Bad stories about Democrats. Buried. Cringe-worthy moments. Edited out. Opponents. Cast as cartoon villains on a 24/7 loop. For years, Trump was the designated punching bag every single cycle, while Democrats basked in soft lighting, background music, and interview questions that could have been lifted straight out of a Hallmark card. That's not journalism. That's PR cosplay. And the public finally caught on.
All right, do the Democrats need a social media platform, this is for you, John, of their own to combat the Republican influence on Twitter? Well, I don't know, but Twitter, it's funny. It used to be completely left. Then Elon said, I'm going to take it over, so it's going to be 50-50 right down the middle. He didn't do that. It just switched completely. So I don't know. It's terrible that I think that we have our own media silos. We need places where like this show, but there's not enough of them, where everybody comes and everybody hears everybody else from all points of view.
And that's exactly why millions of people ditched legacy media for independent voices. Podcasters like Joe Rogan, Theo Von, and plenty of others who weren't afraid to smash the narrative wide open. These guys never pretended to be neutral, but at least they weren't running every story through a partisan fog machine. And here's the kicker. Those podcasts ended up shaping the election more than all of legacy media combined. Which is hilarious when you think about it. The left had the keys to Twitter, the networks, the headlines, the whole media empire, and they still got outmaneuvered by a bunch of garage podcasts where the dress code is hoodies and the fact checker is a Google search.
I think the deeper question that the question's getting at is that if you look at the data in this election, the amount of reach of all of these alternative, I'm talking about the whole podcast space mostly, but also social media. The interviews that Trump did, not starting with Rogan, but Theo Von and all of these other things he did, incredible reach compared to old mainstream media, right?
And then John Heilman, oh boy, decides to say Twitter isn't a real place. How convenient. It was real enough when it was being used to ban stories, throttle accounts, and pump out one-sided narratives on loop. But now that Elon Musk owns it, suddenly it's a worthless cesspool that doesn't matter. Please. That's not moral clarity, that's sore loser syndrome. And you can tell they know it. The second the conversation drifts anywhere near admitting the bias, they start tiptoeing, coating every half-truth in soft, fuzzy language. It's like watching someone try to walk barefoot across a floor full of Legos. You can see the pain in their face, but they're determined to make it across without screaming.
I'd like to steal a line from Dave Chappelle, who said at some point how he doesn't know very much about what goes on Twitter because he doesn't go on Twitter because Twitter's not a real place. That's sort of how I feel about Twitter. And Twitter, not only is Twitter not a real place, but it's become a toxic cesspool filled with nothing, not about right, it's not about conservative, it's just filled with misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So I would rather not have the left replicate that if that's what's required.
And then comes the inflation excuse. Oh, this one's priceless. Heilman actually claims voters' frustration with the economy was mostly perception. As in, people didn't really have it that bad, they just thought they did. Yeah, try selling that line to the family whose grocery bill doubled. Or the small business owner drowning under rent and utility hikes. Or literally anyone who's filled up a gas tank in the last few years. That wasn't perception, that was reality punching people in the wallet. Gas prices through the roof. Mortgage rates topping 7%. Wages flat while everything else soared. You didn't need a pollster to explain it. All you had to do was open your fridge and see what wasn't there.
If you're the sitting vice president for a president who has, throughout his entire term in office, been sitting at about somewhere between a 35 and 40% approval rating. People view the Biden administration as a failure. We can have a long discussion about whether they are right about that, about the economy, but the perceptions of the economy were that people thought inflation was too high, people thought we were on the wrong track, 75% wrong track numbers, and this huge inflation overhang. You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
And here's the elitist kicker. When Heilman suggests 107 days wasn't enough time for America to get to know Kamala, what he's really saying is, you're too dumb to figure this out quickly. That's not just wrong, it's insulting. Americans didn't reject Kamala because they were confused. They rejected her because they were paying attention, and to his credit, Maher pushes back. He points out that plenty of countries run elections in a matter of weeks. They don't need years of campaign theater to size up a candidate, and neither do we. By the end of the first week, most voters already had Kamala pegged. They'd seen the awkward cackles, the rambling answers, the struggle to land a coherent point. You don't need 12 more months to decide whether that inspires confidence.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody in
Okay.
the middle of the top of
Okay,
the
John.
3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Okay, but I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top,
We were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short period of time? Are they all that so much brighter than America?
Heilman keeps circling back to this late decider argument. Those mythical voters who supposedly stroll into the booth still unsure of who they're picking. Maher torches that idea, comparing them to Christmas Eve shoppers. The folks who wait until the very last minute, wandering the aisles in a panic, grabbing whatever's left on the shelf.
Is it your contention is that no people were late deciders in the election?
No, they
Nobody
were. I
decided-
talked about them last week.
Right.
Christmas
So,
Eve shoppers,
so those
I
people,
call
so
them.
those people apparently needed longer than 30 to
No,
90
they
days.
would have been undecided.
always going to be.
Exactly. That's why I call them. I called them, John, I said this last week. I called them Christmas Eve shoppers. My father was one. People who don't buy their presents until the Christmas Eve night. He would go into the store and he wouldn't feel like he could do it until he was fully in the spirit. You had to be in the store on Christmas Eve with Santa and all the fucking elves and everything.
Here's the truth. Last-minute voters aren't clueless, they're cautious. They already know the candidates. They've been watching. They're just waiting to see who delivers the stronger closing argument. And when that argument falls flat, it's not because they needed more time, it's because they didn't like what they heard. Which brings us full circle. The media can spin this however they want: flawless campaign, unfair sexism, not enough time. But the bottom line couldn't be clearer. People knew Kamala Harris. They heard her pitch. And they decided she wasn't it.
I have to make all these excuses for her. This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
That's not misogyny. That's not ignorance. That's democracy. And the sooner the DNC and their media allies stop blaming the voters and start listening to them, the sooner they might actually win again. Until then, they'll keep losing and blaming everything but themselves. So what do you think? Was this really about timing? Or are Democrats just allergic to accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you're done with political excuses, and don't forget to subscribe. Because next time, we're breaking down why the media is more terrified of losing control of the narrative than of losing elections. And trust me, that's where it gets messy.